As I mentioned at the beginning of this service, I just got back from a week-long trip to Israel with 23 rabbis from across North America as part of the Amplify Israel Fellowship, which is for early career rabbis who believe that Reformed Jews should strongly support the state of Israel. And I have to admit, it was a very emotional and a difficult time to be in Israel, as the country completed its 15th month of war with nearly 100 hostages still in Gaza. And literally, without hyperbole, every single person we met was affected by the war in deep and personal ways. Whether it was our tour guide, Doron, whose son was wounded in Gaza just before Shabbat. Thank goodness he's okay. It was the countless people who had spent hundreds of days serving in the reserves, the teenagers at our sister Reformed synagogue in Shoam who were about to graduate high school and perhaps go off to war, or the hostage families themselves for whom every day until their family members return still feels like October 7th, 470 days on. I'll speak in more detail about my trip at Coffee and Conversation at 10 a.m. on February 6th. You're all invited. And we'll find another time in the middle of February, some weeknight, to digest and to discuss what I saw on the trip. But tonight, I want to share the most moving and the most powerful experience of the trip and maybe of my entire life, attending the hostage rally in Hostage Square on Saturday night after Havdalah. Every week, thousands of people gather as hostage families and dignitaries speak, as celebrities sing, and as normal people like you and me wrap each other in a collective embrace that holds our grief, our hope, and our resilience. That Saturday night, we heard tributes from friends of father and son Yusef and Hamza Zayadneh, Arab Bedouin Israeli citizens who had been hostages in Gaza and whose bodies were discovered by the IDF while we were there. And right before we arrived in Israel, Hamas released a video showing Liri Albag, a 19-year-old who was kidnapped from her army post and taken away to Gaza. And in that video, which came out just a few weeks ago, she was forced to say, "I'm only 19 years old. I have my entire life in front of me, but my entire life has been put on pause. The world is starting to forget about us. No one cares about us. We are living a nightmare." So that night that I had the privilege to be at Hostage Square, Liri's mom, Shira, spoke, surrounded by Liri's three sisters. And as thousands of us stood there to listen, to bear witness to her suffering, to say that her suffering is our suffering too, Shira proclaimed, "I stand here exactly 1 week after receiving proof of life from my Liri, and my heart just wants to scream. Liri, our light, just 19 years old, a child with her whole life ahead of her, is there in captivity, in hell. Exactly 1 week ago, we received proof of life." By the way, this was the first sign of life they had had since 6:30 a.m. on October 7th when Liri last texted her mom. But her mom says, exactly 1 week ago, we received proof of life. We saw and we heard Liri. But this isn't our Liri. We saw a Liri who was depleted, frightened, fighting for her life every moment and every minute of the day. Look at her eyes that scream from within, "Get me out of this hell. Don't forget me." Shira says, this video isn't just proof of life. It's a cry for help. It's a clear and unequivocal command. Make a deal now. Liri is alive, and she will return home alive. As Shira spoke with more strength than could be expected of any human being, thousands of Israelis shouted in unison, "Aten lo levad, anachnu itchen. You are not alone. We are with you. I looked around to see people my age, to see kids, to see elderly, tears in all of our eyes. From the most helpless of places, we found strength in one another. And I asked myself, how can an entire country, weary from 470 days of war with 2,000 dead, tens of thousands wounded, hundreds of thousands traumatized, how can they make it through? And I looked around and I saw my answer. I was there for one Saturday night, but for 65 Saturdays in a row, they had stood there together, they cried together, and they grew stronger together. And God willing, this Saturday, tomorrow, in just a few hours, Shiri's prayer will be answered, as Liri Albag, Karina Ariev, Daniela Gilboa, and Naama Levy are slated finally to come home. May the joy, may the relief, may the redemption that we all felt last Sunday, as Emily Damari, Roni Gonin, and Daron Steinbrecher gave their mothers the first hug in over a year. May that redemption come again tomorrow. As Romy Gonin posted on Instagram this week, after a 15-month hiatus, alongside a picture hugging her mom Meirav, Yesh Chaim Achrei Hamavet, there is life after death. And Romy continued, she said, I want to pause and thank the people of Israel, my family and friends. Your prayers and the strength that you sent were with me the entire time and gave us hope that this nightmare would end. You have moved me beyond what my heart can comprehend, and it will take time to fully understand, and thank you all. But remember, there are still 94 hostages longing for us to save them. Am Yisrael Chai, with God's help, we will receive good news in the coming weeks. And after this long and dark period in our people's history, may our whole nation receive good news in the weeks ahead. This week in our Torah reading, we read about the beginning of the end to another dark period in Jewish history. And for those of you taking a little snooze, this is the beginning of the end of my sermon. But we read about the beginning of the end to another dark period in our people's history, our 400 years as slaves in Egypt, in Mitzrayim. The 18th century rabbi, the Meorei Naim, reminds us that the Israelites' journey begins with a descent, that they went down to Egypt, that things, as we read about at the end of last week's parashah, got worse before they got better. After Moses demanded that Pharaoh set the Israelites free, the Israelites' work increased, and they were punished and beaten more than before. But as we read this week, God tells Moses, Ani shamati et na'akat b'nei Yisrael, that I have heard the cries of the Israelites who are suffering, ve'ezkor et briti, and I remember the covenant I made. Just like the thousands of people who I was privileged to stand alongside, who gathered to listen to Shira Albag's screams, God was present with the Israelites in their suffering. God remembered the covenant, and God and Moses and Aaron started the Israelites on the path towards redemption. As the psalmist famously proclaimed, Min ha-metzar karati ya, anani b'merchav ya, from a narrow place, from ha-metzar, I called out to God, and God answered me from a wide expanse. And for the past 15 months, the Jewish people, and especially our Israeli family, has been in the depths, in the narrowness, with the walls closing in, wondering when we will be redeemed. As we watched those blessed videos of Romy, of Emily, and Daron walking miraculously on their own 2 feet, embracing their families for the first time, as we saw Emily Damari's friends on live TV with the newscaster covering them, lifting the newscaster onto their shoulders, and one of them grabbed the newscaster's microphone and said, Shechianu v'kiyamanu v'higyanu lazman hazeh. As we saw Israel's leading news anchors openly weeping on live television, we got our first taste of that redemption. But we know, unfortunately, that the next 35 days of this ceasefire will not all feel like last Sunday. We know far too many of the hostages will not walk out on their own 2 feet, that they will never walk this earth again. Just like for our ancient ancestors, it may get worse before it gets better. But as our group of rabbis heard from person after person we met with, the whole country of Israel is not post-traumatic. They are still in trauma. The country cannot begin to heal, cannot begin to move forward while our hostages are still in Gaza. So like God, may we remember them. May we never forget the 94 hostages still languishing there. May they come home soon, every one of them. At the hostage rally in Jerusalem this past Saturday, they happen all over the country, not just in Hostage Square in Tel Aviv, just hours before Emily, Romy, and Jerome came home and uncertain what would unfold the next morning. Before the thousands who were gathered there went their separate ways, they sang 2 last songs together. The words penned decades ago by Naomi Shemer, Lu Yehi, let it be, let our redemption come speedily in our day. And the words of Hatikva, that our 2,000-year hope of being a free and a safe people in our own land, that hope still endures. If a Jew is left with just one last thing in this world, it is hope. So tonight, let us join with them. Let us all join together as one people in hope and in prayer. The words are on your sheets, or if you don't have a sheet, on page 352. Lu Yehi.